Hi, Misha here, and it's been a minute since I posted a video. This might be my longest pause, and I had my reasons, which I will discuss in an upcoming Black Box. But last time, we looked at the new USS Farragut from Fan Home, and to compare it with, I brought out the Discovery Enterprise 1701 No Bloody ABCD version, and I generally like this, and I think a lot of folks did too. It was certainly the least controversial of the new ships that the Federation had from Discovery. And I'm going to be honest, I would have a hard time defending the quote-unquote Klingon ships in that show. I'm not saying in the abstract some of them weren't kind of neat designs. I like some of the kind of out-of-the-box thinking. But the Federation ships, the Starfleet ships, I can almost square with traditional canon. And even if I can't outside of that, most of them, I actually like the design. Most. So in this video, since I already had to get these out to do that last one, we're going to go through them. I'm going to kind of give some of my head canon, since there's not a lot of actual main source alpha canon out there. And see if I can convince you at least how some of these fit in okay. Or even if they don't, they're still cool designs taken in the abstract. Because again, they did right by the good old Connie. So, what about the ships that came before it? Beginning with the USS Shenzhou, named after the Chinese space program capsules. The Walker class, itself named after quite a famous NASA test pilot, X-15 and whatnot. And with this being the first ship we saw in Disco, it definitely kind of ruffled some feathers. I think a lot of people would have liked to have seen a Daedalus class. On the other hand, we went through this same thing when Enterprise came out, and we saw all new Starfleet ships that looked way too advanced to be pre-1960s, but, you know, time, CGI moves on. This is the case. And I'm not going to get the spinny thing out because we're going to try to burn through these relatively quickly. We'll see how that goes. And what do I think of the design? Okay, first and foremost, and this is a problem that really started with the JJ-verse ships, and really continued on with the first season of Discovery and got better in season 2, the size. I literally don't think some of the people understand the difference between feet and meters, because the stated length of this is 423 plus meters. Keep in mind the original Connie, it fluctuated, but it was about 290 to 300 meters. At least that's kind of established canon for the non-refit version. Why this ship would be so much longer and still have a crew of only 150, whereas the Connie had over 400, is ridiculous. But something I kind of figured out, and I've seen even like Memory Alpha start doing it, is cutting the sizes, dimensions by about a third, and it gels really well. That gives us an overall length of just over 282 meters, and considering most of that is nacelle, the secondary and primary hulls being, say, 200-ish meters, makes sense. It's a shorter and flatter ship. So, going forward in this video, I'm probably not going to mention the ridiculous size and kind of go with the size that works well. Like I said, this is my headcanon. So, with that out of the way, things I like about the ship. This was meant to be a light cruiser, an exploration vessel, a survey ship. I think having the bridge on the underside is a neat derivation. After all, on the International Space Station, the cupola The lookout area doesn't face into space, it faces towards Earth. And this is also where we see kind of the disco-style deflector with the 2 prongs instead of the one of TOS to kind of make them look a little more before TOS's time. I do like that they kind of kept the dish, but they did update it a bit. And this actually works okay because some other early ships we've seen, like, say, Harry Mudd's J-class freighter, actually had 2 separate deflectors. So it seems like there was an era in Starship design where maybe one straight deflector wasn't enough. Kind of like how you went to dual-core processors. So I don't mind that. I also thought it was really neat that this had phase cannons, something introduced in Enterprise, and yes, I did and do like Enterprise. I know it has its flaws. What can I say? I'm a big Scott Bakula fan, and the rest of the crew are actually rather good actors too. Whatever. I think time has been kind to it. On the flip side, it has a couple of photon tubes, which is fine. We see Enterprise get the photonic torpedoes, the immediate predecessor to the photon torpedo. So this is kind of a transitional vessel where it still has the old phase cannons, but it has the somewhat updated photon tubes. It also has a couple of shuttle bays, showing the importance of shuttle bays. Even though it did have transporters, it was the older style lateral vector transporters, which had a lot better capabilities compared with the Enterprise ones, but still limitations compared to what we'd see later. So I like all that. And the crew of 150 makes sense. Deck count seems to be around 13. The Starfleet deck tends to be between 3 and 4 meters, although if you have like subdecks like Deck 15 on Voyager, they can shrink down to even 2 meters, or even like through decks. We saw quite a few of those. Even the original Connie, you might think you know the number of decks it has. You don't. It was never 100% established, and by the time you think it is, something on screen would contradict it. So just take it as it is. All that's fine. I even kind of like the scaffolding strut system they have down here. It's actually very reminiscent of like the truss on the International Space Station. It looks like modern construction. But them nacelles. I think nacelles is where the disco designs, not just this one, lose a lot of people. And I'm going to be honest, I get it. These look like, at the best of times at the front, motion picture era, even more advanced. And then they're just so long and skinny. Also, remember I'm blind, so color's not my strong suit, but from what I've read, the coloration isn't traditional Federation blue and red with some orange yellow. I think it's purple? So I get that's kind of the fall-off point. Everything else, the saucer, the secondary hull, I don't mind at all. Now, it is said that this has a maximum warp of 6, so twice as fast as the old NX-01, and that makes sense because this is considered an older design. I've seen the initial launch dates for the USS Walker around the year 2195 up to the year 2225. I tend to like the date of around 2220. So by the time of Disco, it's in its 4th decade. Not obsolete, but aging, kind of where the Enterprise was in, the 3rd film, Search for Spock. So it's got some new technology. What if, we'll say this is a nacelle design, an engine design, a propulsion design from a different design bureau. Not everything comes from Utopia Planitia. I'm leaving that in. Or San Francisco shipyards. There's also Luna shipyards we know of. And what about Vulcan, Andor, Teller? What if this was a kind of experimenting with a different nacelle structure? Because this is the exploration expansion period. The Federation was founded in 2161. It would take them a couple of decades to really get things together. The Romulan War they'd had to rebuild. And then we had the Daedalus class, which is definitely not that similar to a Connie. Well, what if this is the period, the turn of the century? They're trying new designs, sending them out in space, and kind of seeing what shakes out. The real world does this. For example, Britain had the V bomber series when they were trying to figure out their next nuclear bomber, and they had 3 totally different designs that they put into production, and they, saw which one worked best. America does the same thing. Different design bureaus. So I could posit, if I'm wanting to fit this in canon, that at least the secondary hull, the engine system, is from, Andor. The nacelles kind of look like something that Shran would have enjoyed. So this was kind of cutting edge for what it was. It's a pure science vessel with just, basic defenses for what it needs to do. Not super deep space, but relatively long-range vessel. I could see this being something that they would produce and send out in large numbers, and by the time of TOS, it's coming up on 50 years old and being phased out. Of course, the Shinzo herself was lost at the Battle of the Binary Stars. Finally, moving along, we come to a class that is a love it or hate it, and I actually really like it. The Engel class, named after Joe Engel, who actually piloted the Space Shuttle Enterprise on its test flight, and was one of the early pilots of the Columbia Shuttle, not during its tragic thing. So, very involved with the space program, and the ships we see, we have the USS Earhart, you should know who that's named after, and the USS Toplanahoff, which I don't blame you if you don't. That's actually named after the Vulcan ship that made first contact with Earth. So there's a bit of Earth and Vulcan in the 2 named ship of this class we see. And this is a very different look to a starship. And it's said that it's reminiscent of the Enterprise NX 01, and I see it, I get it. It also kind of reminds me of the much later Sabre class from First Contact DS9, and even has a little bit of Defiant in her, just the kind of compactness. So the overall shape isn't bad, but it is very flat. And this is what we're kind of starting to see as a design aesthetic for Disco. And the nacelles are a little long, but not bad. I think they're much more proportional than on the Walker. I do wish the nacelles were a little more of a box than a flat wedge, but hey, I do like the main hull. I love the compact 2-prong deflector in the front. Very NX01. And we have a bridge module that's not at the bleeding edge of the saucer, but it's much more towards the front than the back. We also have the double pylons, which are another one of those Disco staples that, again, I like. It's showing the technology is a little different. And this is definitely an older ship design, too. If we would go by the registry, these actually predate the Walker by a minute. So let's say they were introduced in 2205, give or take. But I will warn you, with Star Trek, you can't really put much stock in registries. You also can't put much stock in star dates, because most of the numbers were just either made up or done to honor someone's birthday, favorite number, whatever, Halloween. But no, I really like this design in the abstract. And it actually even matches up with some of the other Constitution era, TOS era ships we see, like the Antares. Of course, this is all from TOS Remastered, because the original TOS, we only had Connies. But we don't know much about it. In my size scale, it's about 258 meters long, again, with at least a third of that being the nacelle sticking out. And she's pretty flat. So Probably has a crew of 150 to 200, depending on how we're packed in. We really don't know much about her. She just kind of looks old, and I do like how the saucer actually slopes upward versus inward. Different look. Kind of makes you wonder if there was Vulcan influence here, in which case you might say this was done so it could enter atmosphere. We do know that the Walker class could fly in an atmosphere. This looks like it could definitely even land. There's not much to do, so that would be good for science work. Also, maybe going into gas giants, or if we say maybe the humans had more of an impact on designing this, say following the Romulan War, it is reminiscent of the Saber and even Defiant, which were definitely combat ships. So this looks like in its day it could kick some ass, but it also looks like it's getting long in the tooth. So let's say it also has phase cannons, photon torpedoes, lateral vector transporters, the older technology. Again, I wish there was more out there about this ship. The Diploma half was definitely lost at the Battle of the Binary Stars. And not much more to say about it. These are still all Eagle Moss, even though today Fanhome took over the line. And it's almost all metal on top. It's only when you get to the bottom there's some plastic. It's got some good weight to it, even if it is very pancake-like. But that's a warship, or an escort, or a science ship. What about the day-to-day work? We come to the Hiawatha class. At least we assume so. We don't actually know the class type. And this is not from Season 1, Series 1 to our Brit friends. This is from the beginning of Season 2. And this is not a frontline starship for science, defense, exploration. Nope, this is just kind of what keeps the cogs going. And again, I really like this design. And I actually think this one fits in to established canon, especially with Enterprise, very well. Now, in the show, this actual individual ship with this registry is a medical ship, hospital ship. But in the real world, typically hospital ships were commandeered from liners, freighters, whatever they could that had the space. The general design does just seem to be a cargo ship, a freighter. And it's long. Even with my adjustments, it's just under 400 meters. That's longer than the Enterprise. But I'm okay with that, because we've already seen kind of long, skinny freighter cargo ships from Enterprise, and really even before. Even a lot of the depictions of the Kobayashi Maru had that kind of long, skinny look. Although the JJ one's a little different. Now, this was designed to have cargo containers that could be detached and taken down to the surface of a planet or moon. It also has giant shuttle bays, cargo bays exposed on the sides. We have the double strut engine system. I really like this top straight pylon, and then these angled ones on the bottom. The nacelles are okay. They're not overly long. They're definitely that square aesthetic that Discovery has, very much like the ones we saw on the Diploma Hath over there, which is okay because this is an older ship too. Based on the registry, it's around the same era. And we know that it also has lateral vector transporters. Not sure if it had weapons originally, but it would not have as a medical ship, not unless the rules change a lot. Although, again, the Beverly ship from All Good Things had phasers, not that they were worth anything. But typically medical ships don't, and cargo ships would only have phasers for, like, breaking apart asteroids and what have you. This could also have been used as design for a colony ship. And again, the saucer section, such as it is relatively small, meaning that probably has a relatively small command crew. I don't know if in the show they say, and something like this would probably be highly variable, but I would suspect a ship like this could be run by under 50 people, because we know that commercial civilian cargo ships in the Enterprise era can be run by a dozen folks or so. So 100 years later, yeah, it'd be the same for a starship. It'd be, cargo holders. But on a medical ship, you'd have doctors, nurses, attendants. On a cargo ship, you could have cargo masters. Colony ship, you could have crew. It's just a very versatile vessel. And I think it slots in very well. I mean, with maybe just a few minor adjustments, this could go in TOS Remastered, I think. And I think it's a neat design. Then again, I've said in many videos, I like support ships when we get to see them. Not everything is a cutting-edge science ship or exploration or even combat vessel. The bulk of Starfleet, the bulk of non-Starfleet but Federation ships has to be things like this. And I think it's really neat we got one, and Eagle Moss did a really good job. It's actually got some good weight to it. Really good size, too. Still that very flat aesthetic, but again, I think that fits, that works here. But what do you think? Now let's move on to the Malachowski class. Named after Nicole Malachowski, Thunderbird's pilot, one of the first women in that kind of field, and a relatively small but fast ship that just kind of seems to be one of the bread and butter ships of the fleet, and maybe one of the ancestors of the Miranda Nebula, that kind of saucer and underslung nacelle design. In my measurement, it's about 185 meters, with, again, a good chunk of that being nacelle. So, relatively compact. We would imagine it has a relatively small crew, maybe 100. And this looks like a good, fast patrol, short to medium range, light cruiser, maybe even heavy frigate type. We see a few of these in the show, including, I think, even in Strange New Worlds. Not at all much known. The nacelles are very reminiscent of others. There is a compact little deflector hidden on the underside of the saucer, and we do have a bridge module, again, kind of giving it scale away. Look how large the bridge is in the traditional place. This kind of seems like an intermediate, frankly, background ship. Reminds me a lot of the Centaur class from DS9, Charlie Reynolds' ship. And I both kind of love and hate the long nacelles. They're not ridiculously long on this one. And I think if they were really short, it would look weird. And I think if they were round, it would look weird, just kind of based on the flat design. This would never be a hero ship, but this seems like just the kind of ship, again, like the Miranda later on, that you would just send to do, whatever it needs doing. It can fight if it needs to. It can carry people around. Probably has an updated warp engine from what we've seen, at least capable of warp 7, and probably has the newer transporters and phasers, kind of has that newer feel to it. Not much to say about it, unfortunately. It's a little bit lighter weight because the saucer's the metal part, and nacelles, of course, are your polymer. For what it is, it's a good size. And it's kind of one of two of this pattern we see. So it's slightly larger, in somewhat different role, bigger brother, the Hoover class. And no, not named after the FBI Hoover, named after Robert Bob Hoover, Air Force pilot of World War II fame, who was a POW. And kind of keeping on the Miranda and really the Nebula look to me. I'm being a little careful. This one likes to tip out of its stand. This is one that I like the ship, but they should have put more of a rake on the stand, or maybe clipped it in a different way, because it likes to slide forward. Oh well. We at least have some short nacelles now. I mean, very, very reminiscent of the earlier Plana over there, the angle type, which kind of makes me wonder if this may be a slightly older design compared with the Malahowski, but maybe not. Very disco style deflector. I'm going to say, yeah, this to me feels like a somewhat older ship, more compact and boxy, and seems like maybe it came out of the same design bureau as the Angle. In my scale, this is about 235 meters, but it is pretty vertically stacked with a pretty thick saucer, so I'm going to say it has a relatively good sized crew, a couple hundred folks. Keep in mind the NX-01, while I had a crew of under 100, it could easily support more. That ship was actually quite large for its day and time, about 215 meters. But since you don't have a bunch of nacelle sticking out back, a lot of the length is here. We have quite a large shuttle bay in the back. Again, maybe a nod to this being a somewhat older design. I think this might be a little slower. Let's say the Malahowski is a warp 7, maybe even a little faster. This might still be a warp 6 or 6.5 ship with the more compact nacelles, but also maybe more dependable. I would say this is more of a medium cruiser. Another workaday ship. Patrol, maybe, but this seems more like a long-term science ship. And maybe person ferry. I like the design. It definitely has a kind of newer feel to it, frankly. It's a little more nebula than I'd like. So in the abstract, I like it, but when folks say the disco ships feel a little too 24th century, this is one of them. I think if the deflector were more round versus like the kind of ovular Enterprise shape, and the hull here was more round. I think if this hull was more rounded, less squat, it would, and maybe more boxy nacelles. Of course, I said that about the Angle too. But I like the top. Quite a large bridge dome. Looks more like a workaday bridge, like we might have some flag officers or just extra terminals for science, whereas the Malahowski bridge looked more streamlined for speed, efficiency, smaller crew, slightly larger ship here, so makes sense. It's a neat model. By the way, we have the Clark and the Edison, and I definitely think the Edison of these two is not named after Thomas Edison. I'm going with Edison from Star Trek Beyond, Balthazar Edison, the much infringed upon Mako. Yeah, I like this. I wish I had a little bit more of a, because it wants to slide out on me there. But yeah, these are just kind of the ships of the fleet. They probably mass produced them in the early to mid 23rd century. And they were a bit of a jack of all trades. But our next couple of ships seem a little more specialized. Both of these were dependable ships, one a little more modern but smaller than the other. But neither really pushed technology forward. With this class, though, we start to see the glimmers of new tech coming into design around 2230, 2235, in that time frame. The Shepard class, which, yes, you should know his name for Alan Shepard. Yes, first American in space, also commander of Apollo 14, although he could have been in 13. And the USS Gagarin, again, if you don't know who that's named for, well, not shaming you, but I'm just going to say space history is a lot of fun. And we actually see a number of these ships, and it's kind of got an interesting place in universe and out. And it kind of keeps the slim design going that we saw with the previous two, but now the nacelles are up. This to me is definitely the replacement in a lot of ways for the Walker, and because of kind of the shape of the nacelles and the back, reminds me a lot of the NX-01 style too. So whichever way you prefer. It would have had the newest propulsion systems, easily able to hit warp 7, maybe 7.5, maybe even flirting with 8. And these long nacelles, again very reminiscent of the Walker, are what give it its length of about 335 meters, which is, yeah, longer than the Connie, but it's pretty flat. Still yet, because of the more advanced engines, it probably would have quite a large crew of 250, maybe 300, relatively large vessel. It also had the newer computer systems, kind of the prototypical systems we'll later see used on the Constitution. By this point, it definitely has the phasers that just, emit beams, not the phase cannons. So newer defensive systems. It's just, pushing technology forward and kind of making a design lineage with the previous Walker. I like the pylons for the nacelles too. They're kind of a different shape, kind of a triangle shape. So still has that double going on, but you can see where they're kind of putting them together. Eventually they'll blend into just having one pylon, like on the Constitution. We have a deflector, but it's on the bottom instead of the top of the saucer, and much more traditional bridge module compared with the Walker. So this doesn't seem quite as devoted to survey. It probably could still fly at an atmosphere. I don't know if it could land though, because it doesn't have that girder stuff, but again, it does definitely look more advanced. Hard to say, but kind of a progression of that. I would say it looks like it could have some pretty decent combat abilities, especially from what we see in the Discovery show. But it also doesn't seem like it's completely abandoned science, but it looks like it's more like R&D testing of hardware science than, laboratories and long-term survey mission. It would be classed as probably a light or medium cruiser, because again, the Walker was a light. This is a little bigger, more capable. But then again, it doesn't seem like it would have the full capabilities of a Connie. And in some ways, this is a more conservative way of driving tech forward, at least compared to our next vessel. What if we try 4 of them? From what we know, this was the first quad nacelle design in Starfleet history, at least to be put into mass production on screen, and it would definitely not be the last. Quad nacelles pop up from time to time, the Constellation, and many, many others. This is the Cardenas class, the USS Buran, named after the Russian space shuttle that the internet has really taken a shine to. And this might just be my favorite model Eagle Moss did in this series. It's arguably the biggest and heaviest. It's got a good stand. This is just one where they did everything right. Of course, this was not at the Battle of the Binary Stars, although the USS Jaeger was. Like I said, yeah, this was Lorca's ship, and he survived it, and nothing at all bad happened. No, this is also pushing warp technology forward, essentially using more robust and more nacelles than the Shepherd, and this was able to hit warp 8. Keep in mind that was kind of the maximum safe warp for the Connie, so this would be pushing it forward. So it probably came out a little before the Connie, 2235, 2240. It is about the same length of a Connie, about 295 meters. So actually a little bit shorter than the Shepherd, but then again, we don't have quite as much hanging out the back. I think it's also interesting that the bridge is forward there. And I know the real world thing was they were trying to make it look a little older. And it actually works, because if you look at some of the NX era ships, the Enterprise ships, especially like the Warp Delta, the bridge is towards the front. On the other hand, it has what looks to be a more advanced deflector. It's a little more compact, a little less prongy. This one would have had the newer computer systems and phasers compared with older designs. Mostly its technology was the warp engines, but this one is definitely more of a rapid response combat vessel, although deep space exploration would definitely be there too. Same with the later Constellation. This would probably be an early heavy cruiser, although maybe by the time of the Constitution's supremacy, this would be demoted to light cruiser or medium cruiser. That's kind of how that goes. Crew of at least 300, maybe 350. A little hard to say. Kind of hard to say exactly how much living room is in here without having a true secondary hull. It's just kind of a bulged out saucer. No, but no, these nacelles I like. They're probably among my favorite. They're relatively short. They have some vertical height to them as well. They're just very proportional. Now, the thing is, you can't just do a 1960s look-alike, not unless you're doing like a tribute show. You have to move stuff forward. You also have to understand that in the 1960s, if they had the ability to make things look better, they would have. I think the Phase 2, the concept Phase 2 Enterprise, is actually closer to how Matt Jeffries and Gene Roddenberry kind of envisioned the original Enterprise, but then they had to construct with the materials and on the budget that they had. But no, I really, really like this design. Just think it looks neat, and I think Eaglemoss nailed this model. I don't know why. I guess it's just because it's got more verticality, but it's heavy too. But beyond that, again, I like the stand they did for it. I wish they had done... I like these stands where they kind of sit lower, but then have a nice rake pointing up. I think the Hoover would have benefited from a stand more like this. And I really like how, given time, Eaglemoss did pretty much deliver all the Starfleet starships. Keep in mind, a lot of these we looked at too were originally concepts for the Shenzhou before the Walker design was settled upon. But, you know, don't let a good CGI go to waste, right? But yeah, I think this was an early combat, kind of more offensive-oriented ship without abandoning deep space exploration. Keep in mind, when this launched, they were getting ready for the big Constitution program, and the Klingons were dormant, the Romulans were dormant. So, relatively good time of peace, although a lot of unexplored space out there. So, maybe redundant engines. They didn't really make it go that much faster, but it did mean they could fly home with one, even two nacelles damaged. Or they could alternate, you know, not to put too much stress, because a lot of these top speeds, I'm saying like warp 8 on this, it can't sustain it for more than 10-12 hours. But if you switch them in and out, you might be able to sustain warp 7 a lot longer. Usually the cruise speed is a couple of warp factors lower. So that's probably where this really jumps off, as it can have better sustained speed. And of course it has the newer transporter technology later used on the Connie as well, and therefore less reliance on shuttle bays. Well, let's keep on going forward and talk about the Nimitz class, named after the American Admiral in the Pacific, Chester Nimitz. And this is the USS Europa, which was the Admiral's command and control ship at the Battle of the Binary Stars. And really this class was designed as a central point of a fleet, a command and control ship. And that's okay. It's in some ways very similar. My stand always likes to unplug from its base. It's in some ways very similar to the Cardenas, but in the opposite way. Whereas the Cardenas focused on exploration, speed, and offense, this focused on defense and support and long-term viability. dependability. It has 4 engines again, 4 nacelles, but those are mostly there for power and redundancy. Although, it would have a pretty good top speed, but I feel like it's a little bit slower than the Cardenas. This was probably launched just a few years after the Cardenas, and again, it was always a heavy cruiser and really wouldn't be completely supplanted in that role until the Excelsior came along about 40 years later. It's a little smaller too. It's about 256 meters long. But again, part of that's just being more compact and not having nacelles hang out the back. It has a crew of 250. However, it has very nice appointments, very nice staterooms, wardrooms for an admiral and his staff of about 50. Yeah, by the time of the Galaxy class, everyone gets a nice cabin, but look at the original series, you're lucky to get your own cabin to yourself. Most people bunked, and even if you did, it was pretty Spartan. And most of the crew on this would have that too, but there would be more going on for the staff. This had the most advanced shielding for its day and time. It also had a large shuttle bay, cargo bays, because in peacetime this could be used to coordinate, say, planetary evacuations or long-term diplomatic missions, or just, resupply. Just, it could park and command a fleet of dozens or even more. It has very powerful tractor beams, another reason for the quad nacelles, kind of using more tug power. And I like the bridge style. You notice there's not really a bridge on top. I've seen some say it's actually there, but it's just buried in the hull. That makes sense. I also wonder if there's maybe a secondary bridge up here. Kind of wonder if that's meant to be a deflector, but it also kind of seems very bridge-like up there. And that's very nautical, very Nimitz to have a bridge in the back, but kind of viewing over everything. So it's very possible the Admiral could have his bridge command and control area, and then the actual captain of the ship, first officer, would have their own control area. This was also very useful if you're doing a lot of shuttle operations. It's also said that in wartime these could carry fighters, but we don't really see that a lot. But no, at the Battle of the Binary Stars, this is the flagship of the fleet, and it was pretty well designed for that. I can't imagine they built just a ton of these. This wasn't a one-off. We know that at least a couple of others were built and would serve in the war. When I first got this ship, I was kind of on it, but I've kind of warmed up to it. I think what really does it for me, aside from having relatively short nacelles, which I prefer, is this kind of Miranda-style roll bar, but instead of being a weapons pod, again, I kind of like to think of it as a control center. You got these cutouts in the saucer. I don't know if those are meant to be shuttle bays or deflectors. I'm not really sure what the deflector is meant to be. Again, maybe it's meant to be up here on that above area. Hard to say. But the whole thing just looks kind of intentionally frumpy and ugly, but also durable. And that's actually kind of what you want on a command ship. It's not meant for elegance. This wasn't going to go into deep space. This was probably going to service Federation colonies, planets. Still pretty fast, though. Again, I would imagine almost as fast as the Cardenas class. And it still kind of connects in my head to previous designs, like the Hoover. Kind of has that feel to it. So it kind of seems like it's from that design bureau. Also, much like the Cardenas, it actually fits its stand very well, as you saw. Enough that it actually sometimes wants to pull out the base first, but I don't have trouble with it falling over. Most of these are pretty stable. A couple of them could use some help, though. But yeah, these two are more combat-oriented, or really even three. But, again, this is still a time of peace, and science is a thing. And what did you think came before the legendary Oberth? A pure science research vessel. And again, I like to think of it as the predecessor of the Oberth. the McGee class, named after Canadian World War II pilot and later poet. This is definitely a love it or hate it ship, and I think I'm in the minority because I think it's really neat. Is it a little impractical with the nacelles embedded in the saucer and kind of just being a saucer? Yeah, but the Oberth was impractical too. You know, the always thing is how to turbolift go down those curved struts to the secondary hull with the Oberth being the size it is. Now, I think the Oberth, that thing down there isn't a secondary hull. I think it's a pod, like a science pod, a sensor pod, meaning all the Oberth is up in the, the crew's up in the quote-unquote saucer, where you have the nacelles mushed on the sides. This to me kind of just seems like that. I wonder if there could even be a version with an underslung pod. It also seems like this could fly and definitely even land. It's not very big, about 150 meters. Even in their ridiculous scale, it's not much over 200, so yeah. It doesn't have a huge crew. Then again, science vessels rarely do, maybe around 80. We have at least 6 decks, though. And it does have some offensive capability. The USS Shran is the Battle of Binary Stars. I like to think that President Archer named the ship after General Shran just to, annoy him. And Shran, in turn, made a Andorian ship like a Beagle and named it the Archer just to get back at him. What do you think? I think that's what 2 old men will do when they can't go in the field anymore. They had to have been the best of friends. And we know that Archer was still alive. Don't know when this was introduced, but seems to be relatively modern. So probably sometime in the 2020, the 2000, 220s, 230s in that time period. It's definitely, science vessel. Looks like it's very rugged, very sturdy, not much sticking out. It does have a small shuttle bay in the back, meaning it probably relies on the newer transporter systems, which if it's a science ship, having updated transporters makes sense. The only thing I can say about the nacelles is they do kind of bulge here, meaning maybe there's like a pass-through. We definitely know you can go in nacelles because we see it on Next Generation, so, just say there's a pass-through up here. But I don't know, I think it's just cool and weird and different, and I like that. I'm there for that. The model, well, it's small, it's palm-sized, it's sturdy. All metal, except for some polymer kind of filling out the bottom. Just a sturdy little design. By the way, the USS Cabot was destroyed not by the Klingons, but by the Klingons' ultimate foe, Tribbles. So, that happened. But these science ships probably continued on in relatively large numbers, maybe even by non-Starfleet ships, Federation registered ships, until the Oberth came around in the 2270s. At the beginning of the video, we saw the Hiawatha class, a support ship, cargo ship. As we get to the end, we have another support ship. This one, more of a tug. The Helios class. We see the USS Zimmerman and one other towing the crippled USS Enterprise Constitution. And, sorry there, cord. This is a good old-fashioned kit bash. It's actually kind of nice to know that even in the times of CGI, kit bashing doesn't go away. It made a lot more sense, like for Best of Both Worlds, to use existing model parts, but no reason to not keep it going in the digital age. We've got elements of the Malahowski, the saucer, elements of the Hoover, kind of the nacelle design, and then elements of the Walker, the truss or strut system, and then a few just kind of unique elements like this pad in the back. And we actually see this in other tugs and support ships throughout Star Trek before and after this modern era, the S9, Picard, what have you. Seems to be part of the tractor emitter system or just kind of repair base. And I think these engines are great, even though, like I said, they're kind of modified Hoover. They're squat and powerful, kind of like the USS Europa's over there, for tugging. And it seems like this can tug and warp. It's relatively small, a little bigger than the USS Shran, though, about 165 meters. So depending on probably how many repair crew and maybe medical crew were on board, it would have had 100 to 150 souls. Probably, again, highly variable on the mission. If it's working in more of a shipyard, less. But yeah, it just has very powerful tractor emitters. That's kind of its thing. Does it have weapons for self-defense? Yeah, maybe. You could see where using phasers as more of a scalpel would be useful if you're breaking apart damaged ships, like the tug from Deep Space Nine. It's also nice to see that they're getting more reasonable with the sizes of their ships. Not a whole lot to say about it. It's actually heavier than you'd think. You'd think this would be kind of light and flimsy, but it's pretty chunky because this is all metal. I got this piece back here. I think it's really cool, again, when Eagle Moss does secondary support ships like this, because most product lines wouldn't, especially for just kind of a background ship in this scale, this half foot scale, give or take. The littler ones, sure. But no, I really like it, and it's another Season 2 ship we see. And I think it fits in the fleet just fine. Not a whole lot to say about it, but happy we have it. And ending more or less where we began, with the Constitution. The Enterprise herself launched in 2245, meaning the USS Constitution, assuming that the Enterprise was the second ship of this class, must have launched at least a couple of years before. So, would have had very similar technology. Of course, these could be updated, and that was actually the point of the Constitution, was to be modular, like the bridge changing and everything. We see a lot of changes. This was meant for the legendary 5-year mission, deep space exploration, first contact, defense if needed, but that wasn't really its deal. The main drive behind the Connie was it could operate away from Federation support for months, even years at a time if it had to. Unlike a lot of these other ships that they might have had newer technology, but how reliable was it? Sometimes when you do that, you need to use kind of more tested and true. So it's kind of been some reasons why when you look at the Enterprise here, and it looks more like, say, the Kelvin type ship with the round nacelles, that to me just kind of cries of more of an old style technology. And keep in mind, a lot of Connies were lost during their 5-year mission. Only a handful actually made it back out of the 12 sent out. Of course, the M5 computer notwithstanding, it took a good chunk of them out. This just to me seems like another competing design bureau, along with kind of a different purpose. That's why I've tried to say what each of these ships were designed to do. Role kind of determines how something looks. And I like how they did this. The nacelles are fine. They're not, I don't really like the JJ ones, how they look. These are okay. The swept nacelles versus straight, the pylons, I'm actually fine with. I think, again, if they could have in the 70s or even 60s, they would have gone with the swept back. We see that because of the Phase 2 concept and the motion picture ship. I actually like the shorter gooseneck. I think that's more elegant looking and not a change that should matter. The deflector is very faithful. You can say something about this little kind of skirt on the shuttle bay. That's fine. The impulse manifold and everything. And of course, I know that in Strange New Worlds, the ship itself has changed a little bit, but that's just how things are. Even if you look at the Cage versus Where No Man Has Gone Before versus the standard series beginning with Man Trap and all that, the Enterprise had changes. Of course, like I said, this is roughly 300 meters, crew of 400 plus, although in the Cage it's said to be 200, so you can take of that what you will. Again, consistency with the Connie, it varies. I mean, heck, at one point in time, TOS was meant to happen in the late 22nd, not the 23rd century. So, yeah, a lot was left up to FASA and other things in the 1970s. It really wasn't until the 80s a lot of this kind of gets nailed down. And even then, it's not 100%. So, if Disco still muddles around a bit, I mean, it doesn't doesn't really bother me. I think we can easily just say that this type of ship was meant for something else, and so it looks a little different. And I think that's actually why having so many different looks to the other Disco ships works, because if there was just one straight look, then the Enterprise would be the outlier. But when you kind of look at the 2 or 3 different design things going through, having one more, it's not that bad. But this episode's not really on the Connie. I just, it is part of the fleet. It is part of Discovery. And it's just, it's another angle of Starfleet. Really what made Starfleet great. So we're done, right? We don't have to talk about anything else, do we? Except for, of course, the titular ship. The titular USS Discovery herself, her sister ship, the USS Glenn, the Crossfield class. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. End of the video. And I think this is just one of those love it or hate it ships. And I think this was one that they wanted to make their own signature on. And they did it, okay. As you probably know, they definitely based this on older designs from the 70s. The Planet of the Titans ship had the triangular hull. Even the very mushed saucer, but the see-through saucer, I think that's all Discovery. And the really, really long nacelles, all Discovery. Although the nacelles are pretty long on the Planet of the Titans. You can actually see it in, I believe it's Next Generation Unification, the kind of garbage yard scene. The Planet of the Titans concept's there, so it's technically canon, sort of. This is ridiculously long. Again, half of it's the nacelle, but adjusting for it, it's about 500 meters. 18 decks. It's said that because it is so flat, the actual volume inside is about the same as a Connie, though. Just Connie's shorter and taller, more dense. This is also one of the ships that is definitely newer than the Constitution by a good bit. The USS Crossfield launched in 2255, with the Discovery and Glenn rushed into service a year later. They were originally designed to be basically high-end science ships, running hundreds of experiments at a time. Minimum crew, about 130. Max crew of about 180. With more of the space given over to science missions. They also have a giant shuttle bay in the back for, science and shuttles. And these do seem to be the newer nacelles, kind of born from the Shepherd. It's capable of warp 8, just like the Constitution. It does have the most modern phasers, photons, and obviously the newest computer, just as you expect. And otherwise, it was kind of pressed into the fighting role because of the whole spore drive thing, but that's not integral to the design. That was kind of retrofitted to it. It does have the newer Connie style deflector with the one prong instead of two. And I will say to Eagle Moss's credit, they did a great job with this model. It's actually very weighty, more than you'd think. You'd think there'd be a lot of plastic here, but this is one of the few where the nacelle is mostly metal. The secondary hull is metal. Most of the saucer is a mix of metal and plastic, just because of the see-through. So it does feel good in the hand. And I'm going to be honest, I don't mind the cutaway saucer, kind of more reminiscent of kind of modern spacecraft and space habitations. The triangular secondary hull makes a lot of sense for science there, and to have it kind of separated. And the fact that the more crew area is smaller versus this. I think the big objection is always the long nacelles, and I think even they knew they went a little too far, because when they did the A refit, they shortened the nacelles a bit. So I think, if we had more proportional nacelles, this would have been received a little better. But I think the idea was to make it look like it goes fast. And I will say this, between this and the JJ prize, I still like the look of this better. But this is kind of the culmination of the Discoverse for obvious reasons. What do you think now that it's all said and done? Love it? Hate it? How does it fit in with the rest of the fleet? Anywho, I just had these out. Haven't looked at them in a while. Needed to dust them, so haven't done a video. Again, I'll do a black box very soon. Appreciate you hanging out today, and feel free to discuss in the comments. This is Misha, and I'll get back to regular posting here very soon next time.